What is up, everybody? Welcome to the 4for4mula podcast with today's Spanish Grand Prix preview. As always, I'm your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 4for4.com, with my co-host, Dan Weiner, the senior producer at BetSperts. Dan, what's up, buddy?
Not a whole lot, man. Just excited to have some racing this week in a back-to-back race week situation. Buddy. Finally, nice to not have that gap going on. But yeah, man, fired up to see what's going to unfold tomorrow with a lot of kind of things up in the air this week.
Yeah, and to help us figure out what is going to unfold tomorrow, if you are watching on YouTube, you see a new face on here. We have a very special guest, Bryson Sullivan. You might know him from Twitter at Natural Paradigm. He is the greatest Twitter follower if you are new to F1. I highly recommend it. And he's U.S. based, so he's on our time schedule, which is very nice compared to a lot of the U.K. follows on there. For those that don't know Bryson, he is an aerospace engineering graduate student. If you go on his Twitter, you will notice that he has multiple cited articles on topics such as hypersonics, fluid structure interactions, things that are way over our head as laymen. But luckily, he's also an F1 enthusiast. Bryson, welcome to the show, buddy.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Excited to talk about this week. Excited to talk about a lot of car upgrades. But before we get into it, tell us and the listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got into aerospace engineering, how that translated to a love for F1 and motorsports in general.
Yeah, I think my story is probably similar to many people in that I saw what my father did as a living, wanted to do the complete opposite thing, and then later realized later on in life that I was actually good at the first thing.
What's opposite of aerospace engineering?
No, it was not totally opposite. I mean, okay. I'm still engineering, but my undergraduate degrees in mechanical engineering, and definitely did a little bit of Formula SAE when I was an undergrad, but didn't really realize how much I loved aerodynamics specifically and aerospace engineering more generally until much later. So when I went back to grad school, that's all I've been working on is aerospace. Regarding F1, it's so funny. My interest in F1 is totally accidental. As many people in the United States know, especially 15 years ago, Formula One wasn't really promoted in the same way. It wasn't as popular then as it is now. And I went on a random Sunday. I had some very insistent friends that were like, come out, let's just go to a race on Sunday. And I really didn't want to go because that seems boring. Why do I want to go to watch cars go in circles? But, seeing the cars in person really helped emphasize for me how extreme these cars are. There's literally no thing in the world that humans build that goes around a Grand Prix circuit faster than an F1 car. Yeah, and I've kind of been hooked on it ever since. And if I can use some of my engineering background to help explain some things, I definitely can. But what I will say right at the beginning is motorsport and F1 specifically is so specialized. It's so unique that even having multiple engineering degrees doesn't mean you know everything about it. Sure. It takes time on a daily basis, learning new concepts and talking to people who've been in the sport for a long time. So this has all just been a journey of knowledge for me, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, before I tossed over to Dan, he has a few questions for you. We don't want to bury the real lead here. I mean, you're doing this podcast for us today, but last race, they had you on Sky Sports, which is awesome to see. How did that come about? Because you've been crushing on Twitter and with F1 Twitter, but I mean, Sky Sports reaching out to you is really cool. How did that work out?
I mean, I wouldn't read too much into it. I mean, there's any number of people that they could have chosen. Hey. I think one of the main things that they were interested in is, of course, the technical side of the sport that I really try to get into the most, but also being an American and being someone who actually had a chance to go to the race. I could offer unique insights that someone else may not have been able to in terms of how the cars actually were around the Miami International Autodrome, strategies, what was the food like, that kind of stuff. So no, it was a great opportunity. I always try to attack any opportunity I can to talk F1. That just happened to be one of the bigger ones, and I was happy to join them.
Were you down in Miami?
I was in Miami. Yeah, I was in Miami for the race.
Yeah. How was it?
It was fantastic. Yeah. I hadn't actually been to a race since 2016. So that was about 6 years ago. And of course, I'd never forgotten how fast F1 cars are, but it's all these intangible things that you can get when you actually get to a racetrack that you don't really get when you're not paying attention on TV. When a car locks up in the corner, you can smell the rubber. Yeah. When a car goes past you can feel the air moving. There's all these things going on that you really get a chance to appreciate in person that I highly recommend everyone does at least once.
Yeah, man. I've been trying for the next couple for the last couple of races for the last couple of years to hop on some tickets. But man, those things are it is crazy trying to get tickets right now. It's nuts in the States.
Yeah, you gotta try to go down to Austin. I'm guessing at this point, like it's still crazy expensive compared to like the other sporting events, but compared to Miami, and I can only imagine how much tickets for the Vegas race are gonna be. Like,
I'm hoping that there are some lessons learned about how the Miami GP was run and executed that may spill over into Vegas next year. I don't know exactly how that will go, but hopefully it won't be so crazy with the prices. Who knows?
Yeah. As an Atlanta Braves fan, they are owned by the same people who own Formula One, Liberty Media. I'm guessing they're going to do whatever they think is going to make them the most amount of money because that's the only thing that they've ever operated on. Now, shifting gears to on the track, obviously a lot has been made this year about the new regulations and the new cars. So, Bryson, from your perspective, what are your general thoughts on the changes to the cars this year, and how has it impacted F1 from a team and viewer perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple of parts to this. So first of all, I think the cars look great. Actually, I didn't hate the way the cars looked before, but I really like the angles and the rounded edges of these cars in a way that I didn't think I would appreciate based on the show card that we saw previously. I also think that in terms of the intent of the regulations, it's actually working quite well. And really what I mean by that is a specific shaping of the aerodynamic wake coming off of the car and modifying its trajectory so that it doesn't affect the car behind quite as much as the old cars were. I think that's actually working quite well. And it's one of the reasons why this particular race is going to be more interesting this year than in previous years, because these new regulations are going to help significantly in some of the high-speed corners. But probably the most important thing that's happened this year with the new regulations is nothing whatsoever to do with overtaking, which was the point of the change of the regulations. It's to do with the running order of the teams. Right? Anytime you have a regulation change, you're starting from scratch. Oftentimes, nothing that you build from the previous year carries over to the current year. You're starting from scratch. And even in teams that may be incredibly well qualified and incredibly experienced with multiple championships, their fortunes can turn around in the blink of an eye, as we've seen in many years past and even currently.
Yeah, and I mean, on that point, it's another thing that has contributed to that. At least I think I don't know how much they are going to be able to enforce this, but the spinning cap is also supposed to be one of those things. So, one of their hopes was not just the overtaking with the new cars, but the spinning cap getting everybody on the same level. But to that point, we're already seeing some controversy with those new changes, and we'll jump right into it. Going into the Spanish Grand Prix, we were expecting a lot of changes, and one of the changes that got unveiled that everybody's talking about is Aston Martin. New side pods, new floor, changed the rear wing. There's a couple other changes that I think I'm forgetting, but any notes on those changes? And the obvious question, are they green Red Bull?
It's a beautiful thing, this sport. I love it. So there's nothing moral or principled about looking at someone else's design, seeing that it's great, and saying, no, I'm not going to copy that because I'm too scrupulous to go down that path. The reality is anything that you can do to improve your own car and make it faster, you tend to do. Sure. And the rules against copying things about your car to modify it to represent what it's in someone else's car, the only real rule is that you can't share like data. You can't share like computer files with the exact information and the geometry of the car. And you can't use complex photogrammetry software to precisely reproduce surfaces in 3 dimensions based on pictures. But you can look at pictures in a general sense and try to sort of loft surfaces that represent what you saw in someone else's car. That's something that is common in Formula One. And I don't have any problem with it because oftentimes one team will copy someone else's idea, and in order to actually make it work for their own car, they have to modify it or tweak it a little bit to work with their existing package. And many times that actually improves the design fundamentally. And then the original team sees that new design and says, oh, I didn't think of that. And then they kind of feed back off of each other, and everyone gets faster as a result. So I don't have a problem with that. As far as Aston Martin goes, they're in a bit of a difficult situation because their side pods look exactly like Red Bull's side pods on the side of it and the floor, but they claimed that design was in the wind tunnel last November. Yeah, Red Bull side pods were not revealed to the public until March or whatever it was for preseason testing. So there's something afoot there. I don't know what it is, but I know that it's interesting. That's all I'll say. It's legal for now, certainly.
Yeah, the FIA said everything they're doing is okay. For those that don't know, Aston Martin did poach a bunch of Red Bull team members and gave them a ton of money. So I guess you could say there's a chance that they had this idea already before they left Red Bull. It's just one of the funniest rules in the sport because you can't unknow what you know, right? Once you see something and you know that's working, how do you not say, I'm going to try that thing? But aside from what we think is right or wrong, we saw Aston Martin have not the best qualifying today, but what are they trying to accomplish with their changes in terms of performance compared to what we've seen? Because they've been in the back of the pack early in the season, and we saw them, they had a pretty good qualifying in Miami. They fall back a little bit this week. So what are they hoping to get out of these changes? Obviously performance, but specifically, what are they trying to change?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things about the performance of an F1 car is getting as much clean air as possible to the back of the car, to the top of the diffuser. And the question is, okay, well, where does that air come from? Does it come from the gap in between the front tires and the nose and sort of slide down the sides of the car? Or does it come from somewhere up higher and then sort of downwashes, is directed by the side pods to the top of the diffuser? Aston Martin previously had what I would call like a full body undercut, which is to say they had a side pod, but it was sort of like hanging in the air off of the floor, making a nice clean channel for air to flow from front to back. Whereas Red Bull has a more traditional side pod that actually fills out the side space in the design volume, but the top of it is down sloping towards the diffuser. And it basically means that the path of air to the diffuser is different for one car versus the other. There certainly are drag implications in there as well, but certainly it has primarily an aerodynamic implication on downforce, and cooling is another part of it. But the thing I want to mention briefly about Aston Martin is there's a big difference between what you see in CFD, what you see in the wind tunnel, and what you see in the track.
Sure.
And it's always a good idea to do back-to-back tests with old parts and new parts to see if there actually are an improvement. Aston Martin chose to upgrade both of their cars, the new specification, seemingly without testing it back-to-back with the old specification on the same track. And the reason why you do that is because you don't want to have a bad or not working part on both cars and not know it. And to be honest, I think that actually might have been what happened in qualifying today for Aston Martin.
That makes sense. Yeah, and we see the top teams do it all the time, right? We've seen it with Ferrari and Mercedes a couple times this year where they're giving one car a change, and that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of Mercedes.
Yeah, I mean, if the big story this year has been the resurgence of Ferrari, I think the 1B big story has been what in the heck has happened to Mercedes. It has been a struggle this year for them and Lewis Hamilton in particular. They were hoping to see some changes this week. I know the new floor, front wing changes coming in, a much, much, much better week from beginning to at least this point for Mercedes. But and Toto Wolff even said after qualifying today, they believe they have fixed their porpoising issues. But they're still, if they fix their porpoising issues, they're still a bit slower than the top two teams. So what do you make of the changes that Mercedes has made? And if they have fixed the porpoising problems, are they still a bit behind the 8 ball the rest of the season because they've had to spend so much time trying to fix that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that Mercedes started the season on the back foot, which is kind of ironic because they committed to the new car, halfway through last season, whereas Red Bull was developing their car continuously throughout. If there's one thing I can impress upon people is the extraordinary difficulty of building a Formula One car, especially a successful one under new regulations. The fact that you've won 7 championships on the trot or 8 championships on the trot doesn't actually guarantee that you're going to get the new regulations right. Mercedes seemed to have found a very interesting and very fruitful design in terms of what the CFD is telling them and what the wind tunnel is telling them, but they just can't realize it on the track because of this porpoising issue. The changes that they made to the floor this weekend were very successful, not only in terms of, physically watching the onboard laps, but the driver feedback, where's their head bouncing. That was a major performance limiting factor in their new, zero side pod design. And I think what's interesting is the bouncing is definitely gone, but it's not clear to me that they have used that information to optimize the package that they have. Almost every single race, they've been struggling so much. The question has just been, are we going to have porpoising? How bad is it going to be? And what compromises do we have to make in order to run the car in an appropriate window? This weekend is the first weekend where they can say, okay, yeah, actually, we think we've got this porpoising thing under control. Now, how can we optimize the package that we have? They haven't quite finished that second step yet, but we're going to find out in the next couple of races what the real performance ceiling of the W13 really is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw out the obvious question everyone wants to know, and you could give a simple yes, no. Like, are they going to be able to compete with Red Bull and Ferrari?
For a championship, I don't think that's really a realistic thing in terms of what's probable. Yeah. It's certainly possible in a theoretical sense because we've seen how questionable Red Bull's reliability has been. They've had power unit issues even today in qualifying that prevented Max from going for a second lap in Barcelona. So if you have retirements every fifth race, maybe someone else can actually gain points on you. One of the Mercedes shining lights this year has been they're incredibly reliable. They've used fewer power unit parts than any other team. So broadly speaking, you should not expect Mercedes to win a championship this year, but it could happen. What I would say is that one or two or maybe even more race wins are definitely on the cards, especially now that they think they've gotten a handle on this porpoising issue. There will be a few tracks where I think Mercedes will do really well, especially Lewis Hamilton, and Montreal is one that I have my eye on for a surprise Lewis Hamilton victory.
Okay, well, we'll definitely take note of that because, I mean, the main thing we do here is betting in daily fantasy sports. So we'll write a little note, guys. Remember, when we get to Montreal, keep that in your back pocket. A team that has been all over the map this year has been McLaren. We just saw them get off to an awful start in Bahrain, and then a couple races later, they get a podium from Lando. They were one of the teams that made a lot of changes to their car this week. From what I saw, front and rear wing, the floor, and also the side pot inlet. Unfortunately for them, Lando had problems in FP2. He ends up getting his qualifying lap deleted in Q2 today, but we do see Daniel Ricciardo get a P9, so that should be encouraging from a team perspective. Did they do enough to at least give them some consistent hope to be battling for the top of that midfield spot? And how are these changes going to impact what their aspirations are this year?
I think Alfa Romeo is still probably the top of the true midfield teams, but I would say McLaren's right next to them. Okay. McLaren brought so many upgrades. I have a list here from the show and tell sessions that they had previously. I won't go through all of it, but they're quite numerous. But more importantly, what they did in free practice 1 was they had a brand new floor and an old specification floor. They ran a new floor on Lando's car and the old floor on Ricciardo's car, tested them, made sure the upgrades worked, and then actually applied them. That's something that Aston Martin didn't seem to do. Right. But no, McLaren is definitely in a good position. They had a great preseason test in Barcelona. There aren't that many slow corners in Barcelona, not many very high energy braking events around the lap. And McLaren, generally speaking, seems to do well. So I think that if Norris was in a position to actually finish his lap, and again, he was disqualified by mere millimeters probably, I think they're definitely in a good position. But I think that Alfa Romeo, and in particular in the hands of Valtteri Bottas, is really their real competition right now.
Yeah. Before we move on to the other teams, I mean, do you think they got enough data, even though they had those rough weekend so far from Lando, that they're confident enough in what they tried to do? Like you said, they did end up switching both floors, and we saw it from Danny Rick. So is Lando kind of a sleeper this week?
I think it could be, yeah, definitely in a position to pick up points if someone else drops the ball. And I do think that there's a lot of information gathered by the team in terms of what's working, what's not working. I think the thing people need to kind of get their head around is, yes, there were a huge number of updates to almost all the cars this weekend except for Haas, if I remember correctly. But this is Formula One. Teams add parts to their cars essentially every week. It's less now because of the cost cap. They can't bring parts every single race necessarily. But the parts that they do bring are, generally speaking, effective. So whether or not a car is good or bad isn't just a function of how well the driver did or if that circuit, fits that particular car. It's actually about, well, have you developed the car? Is it actually an inherently faster car now than it was 3 weeks ago? Oftentimes it is.
Yeah, if we listen to the radio, it's never the driver's fault, right?
No. So, look, sometimes it's definitely the driver's fault, and they'll admit it as much when they miss a breaking point. But
So obviously Ferrari is the top of the table right now. They have been the best team all season long, and they brought a new floor here. They get P1 in qualifying again. Charles Leclerc is having a great year. What do you make of the changes that they made this week? They were hoping to be able to gain a little bit of speed on the Red Bull car overall. Do you think that they're going to be able to keep, in terms of just pure pace, be able to keep pace with Red Bull? Where do you see Ferrari going as you now see Max Verstappen gaining on Charles Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship and things tightening up between the top two teams?
I think this track is actually a Ferrari track. So broadly speaking, the characteristics of the Red Bull and the Ferrari historically this season have been Ferrari has phenomenal grip and downforce in terms of braking events and in high-speed corners. Red Bull has phenomenal top speed. Red Bull's had the highest top speed of the field for pretty much every single race. And so a track that doesn't have a tremendous number of straights and a lot of high-speed corners requires a lot of downforce. I would actually expect Ferrari to do, in general, better than Red Bull. Now, the specific updates that they brought, you mentioned the floor is updated. The rear corner has been changed. They also had 2 different versions of their rear wing that they were experimenting with various downforce levels, and then lateral distribution of airfoils to sort of improve or remove the aerodynamic efficiency in favor of raw downforce. They've been making upgrades, and they brought the ones that are effective. So I think Ferrari is actually in a very good position. They do have some concerns about tire degradation, which is to say, how much slower is your lap every lap because you're wearing through the tires. That has tended to be an issue for Red Bull, or excuse me, for Ferrari. Red Bull seems to have been a little bit better with that. So that'll be a factor this weekend for sure. And if they can get a handle on it, they certainly have a shot at victory. But we're looking at the long run pace for the different cars, and Verstappen looks to be the class of the field right now. I don't think Mercedes or Ferrari could beat Verstappen's race pace if he was able to replicate that. But I do think Mercedes has a legitimate chance of taking on Ferrari in terms of the race pace. Now, again, single lap pace is a separate question that I mentioned. Ferrari's probably the best, and they showed that in qualifying. But race pace is a different thing. So we'll have to see how the race unfolds.
Yeah, George Russell even mentioned that after qualifying today. He feels like they're going to be able to contend with Ferrari. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, because a lot of the stuff is over my head. I believe Ferrari made some changes to their setup today because of the tire degradation, but then they were not able to get any laps on the medium tires. So how they were fine on the softs today, but the mediums, there's still a little bit of uncertainty with Ferrari this weekend on how the tire degradation is going to hold up on medium tires.
Yeah, it's just the nature of this track surface. It's very old. It's very rough. It churns through tires. The softest compound that Pirelli brought this weekend is a great qualifying tire, but it will be shredded to bits in the race with full race fuel. So they have to run the medium tire and the hard tire, and those have totally different characteristics. They require different wing angles actually for the cars. So yeah, it definitely is up in the air. We don't know who's going to win just yet, but there may be a surprise or two before it's all over.
Before we get into the qualifying results and what we're taking away from that, I mean, I think those were the biggest or the most notable changes. Did any other teams have any changes that you think are worth noting?
I think Haas and Alfa Romeo had great days. Mm-hmm. Haas had Haas went from having one of their cars on fire in the pit lane to getting into Q3 for the first time by the very same, disqualification that took away Lando Norris's lap. So Haas could never even dream of that kind of a performance years ago. And so I'm very happy for them. American team really have a new lease on life this particular year, and I wish them all the best. And again, Alfa Romeo has been sort of quietly but consistently putting themselves in a position to deserve more respect, and I think they've gotten. They also have an interesting side pod design that's not too dissimilar from the original Aston Martin design, but theirs seems to work very well. They had some porpoising issues in preseason testing. Once they solved them, they were right on the pace. So I would say look out for Valtteri. Valtteri could have finished 5th in Miami, but apparently he was distracted by a battle behind him with Mercedes, and he lost 2 places, allegedly.
So, I mean, he's always distracted. I mean, Valtteri kind of exists in his own world.
No, we can't have Valtteri slander, because I actually got a chance to meet him in Miami for 2 seconds, and I shook his hand. So I can't condone any slander on something that I want.
But I'm just realistic about what to expect from him.
Yeah, I think it was funny. I think his quote was, "I got distracted by my mirrors," and that was
full disclosure. If I'm being honest, I think he's saving face about that. Mm-hmm. If you look at the timing delta between the George and Lewis fight, they were catching him by like half a second a lap all the entire time. He was under pressure. Mm-hmm. He was pushing, say, in front of them. I'm sure he was distracted, but he was pushed to the limit of grip by the race behind him. So just keep that in mind as well.
Sure. Before we move on to the other teams, Dan has a couple of questions. You mentioned Haas being a big winner. That was easily their best qualifier of the year, with both drivers getting into Q3. Is this a function you mentioned? The way this track is going to hold up is going to be very rough on the cars, on these soft tires. Does this look like a pace that they could maintain tomorrow, or was this just a very good qualifying and they're going to have a tough time, especially Mick, who's really struggled this year, holding those places tomorrow?
I think they can. I think that their ability to reproduce pace in a race is actually quite good in Barcelona because it's a test. It's a track that everyone goes to all the time, every year, multiple times. You don't have to worry about drivers getting up to speed with the track configuration. They have tremendous amounts of data. There are so many fewer variables racing in Barcelona than there would have been at, say, Miami. Track evolution is going to have a completely different characteristic than it did at Miami. So I think they actually will be in a position to fight. And again, pressure is a privilege, right? You only have the opportunity of losing points when you have an opportunity of gaining points, right? Yeah. So, the drivers will have to avoid sort of silly-ish mistakes like the kind we saw from Mick Schumacher and Seb in Miami. But if they can, I think they'll definitely be in the points this weekend for sure.
Nice. So we take a look now. We'll bring up the results from qualifying this morning. Charles Leclerc on the pole, Max Verstappen next to him, and then Carlos Sainz, George Russell on the second row, with Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton next, Valtteri Bottas, K-Mag, as we mentioned, and then Daniel Ricciardo, Mick Schumacher, 10th. We talked about, we covered a lot of this. Haas, I think, has to be thrilled with what happened out there today. Aston Martin has to be very unhappy with what happened today. But in terms of what we saw from the car upgrades and how it translated into qualifying, what were your biggest takeaways from what you saw?
The biggest takeaway is that the pace that Mercedes showed in free practice yesterday is not a false dawn as it was in Miami. It's real, genuine pace, and Mercedes is taking a step in the right direction. They're not quite the fastest car yet, but they were fast enough to beat one Red Bull in qualifying, right? Because Russell out-qualified Sergio Perez. That's the first time that's happened this year, if I recall correctly. So they've made a real step, and the fixing the porpoising has helped them a lot. They're not quite where they need to be just yet. As you mentioned, Aston Martin's had a difficult day. I've offered a hypothesis as to procedurally why that may have been the case in terms of fully committing both cars to the upgraded specification right away without the opportunity to do proper back-to-backs. And again, there may be more information that comes after the fact where someone from Aston Martin tells me, hey, we did do a little back-to-back, but you couldn't quite see it. And I fully accept that possibility. But broadly speaking, they didn't have a great day. They'll be studying reams of data tonight to figure out what they can do. They're limited in what they can change between qualifying and the race, and they're in what you call parc fermé. So they can't change too many things, but if they can change something to improve their pace, I think they will. And otherwise, McLaren seemed to be okay. They were in the mix, but the biggest winners this qualifying is probably Haas. 2 cars in the top 10. That's nothing to sniff at.
Yeah, and they have to be excited because, as you mentioned, they made no or virtually no changes. So
didn't.
They're running strong on with no new development. I mean, as you've mentioned a couple of times, one thing that's going to be really tough is we saw these cars on the softs, and this track is going to be really hard on the tires. And as you mentioned, race pace and quality pace are 2 very different things. Is there anything just in terms of the specific to the upgrades that we either saw in qualifying that might not translate tomorrow to the race, or vice versa, that they didn't get a chance to show in qualifying that we might see show its face tomorrow during the race?
Yeah, so all the upgrades that I'm aware of are aerodynamic in nature. Even the ones that were seemingly mechanical suspension upgrades, they're actually like aerodynamic fairing around the suspension. It's mostly aero. I think there's a difference between maximum aerodynamic force in terms of downforce and then aerodynamic balance, right? So if you can get the maximum aerodynamic force and downforce on your car through an upgrade, that can give you a lot of grip, but it could be unbalanced. And over the course of a race stint or a Grand Prix, that imbalance could actually cause one side of the top of the one axle to wear more than the other. And that could actually require you to pit earlier than you might otherwise. So there are, if you look through the documents and see what the teams actually upgraded on their cars, they're kind of broken down into two things. Things that change the local load distribution, like adding downforce here or putting it there, and then things that are called flow conditioners, something that you don't really care about the downforce that particular element makes, but it changes the airflow downstream in a beneficial way to the downstream components. So I would definitely, there's nothing that I saw that could really let me know which of those there are, if it was focused on peak downforce or on aero balance. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't want to make a statement that's not evidence-based. And right now, I just don't have any information to see who would be better in race pace than qualifying pace. I know there's going to be some differences, but I don't want to give a false impression of what I think it's going to be.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of the upgrades, I think this weekend, next weekend are really interesting from an upgrade perspective, but also just in general for these new cars. This is a track this week where I believe 28 of the 31 winners have come from the front row. Next week in Monaco, you will probably be able, if you play the drinking game, drink every time they say the word processional. Next week, you'll probably die by Friday, somewhere around.
No, before Friday.
FP2.
They started a day early in Monaco, historically, but not this year.
Not a track that is known for overtaking. Maybe the most fun race to look at from just an aesthetically pleasing perspective, but maybe not the most exciting race. So just in terms of like the new car setup this year in general and the upgrades, like what do you expect the impact of that is going to be on this week and next week? And do you think that the upgrades are going to accelerate maybe some of the chances for overtaking and more exciting races this week and next week, or is it going to be about par for the course?
Yeah, so think back to what I said about the general philosophy of going back to ground effect cars and manipulating the wake behind the car. This is designed at improving the aerodynamic downforce of the car that's trailing. That really only helps you in high-speed corners, right? Barcelona has a ton of high-speed corners. Monaco, not so much, right? Mm-hmm. So if I was to expect a race that would benefit tremendously from the new philosophy for the car design, Barcelona would be it. I would expect there to be significantly more overtakes this year in Barcelona than we've seen in previous years, because in previous years, the cars were not explicitly designed to be able to have mutually beneficial aerodynamics and things like the current cars are. I think we're going to have a very lively race in Barcelona coming up tomorrow. And as far as Monaco goes, there is not even though you're going to have the highest downforce configuration of the entire year in Monaco because the speeds are so slow, there's not an overabundance of high-speed corners. And so the very mechanism that the 2022 regulations are designed to sort of improve, you can't really take full advantage of because the corners are either too slow and they're mechanically dominated versus aerodynamically dominated, or there's just not enough space to overtake. There's just not enough space to overtake. There's maybe one and a half places you can overtake in Monaco. And that's is far more important than the ability to eliminate high-speed understeer. So I would say focus on the qualifying order in Monaco to be a very strong indicator of what the finishing order is going to be, and that's less of a factor in Barcelona because I expect the new regulations to really show their true potential tomorrow.
That's exciting. I mean, I've heard, long-time F1 fans and analysts say that tomorrow is the most boring track on the calendar. So if people are expecting that for what we do for gambling and fantasy sports, if it's a really good week to go against a grain where everybody's just expecting to stay the same as quali, that's some really good information. Outside of the scope of everything we've talked about, Bryson, with the upgrades, is there anything that you're really looking forward to this week, or just any general thoughts on this weekend's race?
So I think this is the ultimate test of aerodynamic theory. Right? Sure. Now we get to find out how clever we really are. I think we've already had plenty of evidence that the new regulations are working. But if there was a scenario in which the regulations really aren't doing their job, you're going to see it, tomorrow. And as you said, it's thought of as a generally boring race unless you have a very offset tire strategy with a huge grip differential, and then you can get some fun overtakes like we had last year. But broadly speaking, yes, it has historically been a boring venue. And in fact, that's precisely what's motivating these regulation changes. So think of it as like a key and a keyhole type of thing. Sure. The regulations were made specifically for this particular track. I'm sure when they were doing their lap simulations, they were using this particular track. Mm-hmm. This is actually going to be a situation where you should expect to see big differences this year versus previous years.
Now, for the average fan that doesn't know much about the technical aspects of motorsports, what are some resources to gain knowledge on things like basic aerodynamics and understanding of what some of these car upgrades actually mean?
Yeah, so I think there's many ways to look at this. I think the best way is to watch videos on YouTube. Oftentimes, those videos are guilty of oversimplification, which happens all the time. But those are a very good sort of one-directional way to sort of learn things about F1 technical things. But also Twitter. Twitter is remarkable. There, the bad parts of Twitter are extraordinarily bad, but the good parts about it are extraordinarily good.
Definitely.
And you can have direct communication and contact with, former engineers that used to work at Mercedes or Ferrari, and current people that even work for Formula One, or technical journalists who really do the work, who are poring over pictures, their spy photography pictures every night to actually see what the team's developments are. You can talk to them directly if they're available. Right. We also set up a Discord server, an F1 technical Discord server. It's nothing fancy, but it's a good repository of information and expertise from us fans that usually can be helpful for people just getting their feet wet in the technical side of F1.
How do people find that Discord?
I will. I've put a tweet out yesterday about it, but I will share the link with you, and you guys can share it as well. Again, it's just a fun place to see, and oftentimes I get things there before I see them on Twitter.
We'll definitely check that out. And as far as the F1 Twitter space goes, I mean, anytime you like you said are on Twitter, especially in a competitive sport, there's going to be some bad, but luckily for us, at least in terms of Twitter, the betting and the daily fantasy space hasn't infiltrated F1 to the degree that a sport like it has NFL. So if you're coming from an NFL background like myself and Dan, F1 Twitter is actually quite a breath of fresh air. So if you haven't got involved in F1 Twitter yet, it's at least relative to some of the other sports, I think it's pretty awesome right now.
Yeah, just one final thing that might be a very good way to learn in a fluidic sense is take advantage of Twitter Spaces. This live audio format that people have been using more and more. It's actually incredibly powerful as a way to sort of connect people, and oftentimes it can be easier to sort of digest information or have organic thoughts in a live conversation than typing back and forth in however many characters that Twitter allows these days.
Yeah, definitely. Those spaces have been actually one thing that I need to get a little bit more involved in. Bryson, you have given us a ton of valuable information for this race, stuff that we never would come up with on our own. So we really appreciate your time and your insight. Where can the listeners find you, and are you working on anything right now that they might want to check out?
Twitter is the best place. It's the place where I'm probably most active. There may be a technical article that I write here and then, but I would post it on Twitter in any event anyway. As far as things coming up, maybe you'll see me on Sky News again. Or on Sky Sports. Who knows again? Actually, there's basically a 99% chance I'll actually be in Montreal for the Canadian Grand Prix, and there'll be some things associated with that. But primarily, just find me on Twitter at the Natural Paradigm.
Awesome. Appreciate your time, and hope to talk to you soon, Bryson.
Not a problem.
All right. That was fantastic. We will get into all of the good DFS stuff, but I think that gave us a lot of insight into everything that we're going to try to be tackling this week. And to supplement everything Bryson just told us, make sure you are checking out Run the Sims. 4for4 has teamed up with Run the Sims for projection tools and content for both F1 and USFL DFS and betting. Go to runthesims.com and use the promo code 4for4 for 10% off USFL and F1 offerings, or check out the link in the description. And as we get into our DFS strategy, everything that we do every week is going to be tied directly to Run the Sims projected ownership, our optimal rates, how we're going to be figuring out exactly how much we want to use each driver, each captain, each constructor. Justin has done a really good job of updating those. They've been extremely precise. We love to get them, on the show when we can. Sometimes it doesn't match up, but we've done a pretty good job here of kind of figuring out who is going to be more popular, who's going to be less popular. One thing that we've noticed, Dan, is that the field has been crazy overvalued. If a teammate starts ahead of his teammate in quali or on the grid, like that guy's just going to be so much more heavily owned. So there is a lot of leverage opportunity there every single week. The big change that we saw last week in Miami was the inability to use the Max or Charles and captain with another one of them as driver and the Red Bull Ferrari combo and constructor. That made it really exciting. It was great to see that. DraftKings reverted a little bit this week to where you can do it. There are a couple combos where you could jam in Max Charles and Red Bull or Ferrari with one of them as a captain, but the combos very few and far between. So what we were talking about before this pod, and this is probably going to be the basis of our entire DFS analysis this week, is that is it even worth it to use those combos? Like they're going to be duped. We've seen 3 or 4 lineups duped 100 times almost every week, except for last week. That number went down to only one lineup was duped over 100 times. Now these Max Charles, Red Bull, Ferrari combos are probably going to go back to being duped. Since there's only 3 or 4 combos you can make of them, they're probably going to be duped 200-300 times. So like it's almost not even worth it. Unless you're playing a 50-50, it's almost not worth it to use them in any tournament format, right?
Yeah, it's like what you said. I mean, there's just going to be so many other people that even if it ends up being the nuts lineup, like you're going to end up chopping first place with 200 of your closest compadres.
Yeah, we've seen a lineup duped. I think 426 times is the highest we've seen this year, and I think that could happen this week.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't have the. It's fun getting logged out every time I want to move computers and trying to look at it and just like trying to build on the fly the lineups that are possible. And honestly, like you're looking at maybe 1 or 2 drivers drawing dead in those lineups, and it still might end up being the best lineup. If those 2 guys lead every lap of the race, then it might still be the best lineup.
Yeah, I there's just no, unless you're playing. I mean, I guess if you're playing, they have a $100 single man with only 66. It's actually $121 now with only 66 entries. I mean, you could go in there and hope that only 2 or 3 people run that lineup, but I just don't think like the obvious chalk, Max, Charles, and then I think it's basically the 3 cheapest guys, and I think you might actually have to play teammates. I think like if you use Red Bull and Max, I think you actually end up forced into Stroll and Seb together, which obviously makes no sense.
No, because you can get I think you can get Joe in there.
Okay,
you can get Latifi, Joe, and one of the.
I think I just don't. Sure, it could be the nuts, but you're getting no upside from that lineup. And like if you're playing the big Grand Prix, the $15, the 125K guarantee, like what you're not playing to get 100. You're not trying to turn your $15 into $120. It's just like you're not losing any upside by not playing that lineup. So I think if you're playing 150 lineups, sure, roll out the 3 combos of those, and like you're just because you can't chop first. If you're someone that's only playing 3 lineups, you're playing a single entry or a 3 max or even a 20 max, I just don't see any point in using it. But let's move on. I've loved this format where we've kind of just been going through the teams and looking at the teammates, going alphabetical order just to make it easy. And we're going to start off with a really interesting one because Alpine has been a team that has been right around the we will call it, I guess, the fringe points, right around that 10th place kind of every week, both Ocon and Alonso. Alonso, really, really rough quality, coming in 17th. Ocon, right around where you expect him. 12th, 6,600 for Ocon, 6,000 for Alonso. So on the surface, Ocon's starting so far ahead. He's pretty much had better pace this year than Alonso, but Alpine's not a bad car. So do you think maybe even though Alonso is the worst value in terms of his salary versus where he's starting the grid, is he the driver with the most move up the grid upside this week?
Let me just kind of look through this order once again. Yeah, I mean, probably right. Like he's $660 cheaper than Ocon. Now we've talked about how generally speaking, it's hard for a teammate who starts so far behind their teammate to pass them and beat them in the head-to-head for those 5 points. But it's Fernando Alonso in his home GP. He's 17th, so if he falls, he can't fall. Yep. I mean, I guess technically he can fall 3 spots.
Yeah, but that's 1 point.
What's the likelihood of, unless he wrecks, what's the likelihood he's going to finish behind like Latifi? Not very high. So, yeah, I mean, he's a guy who probably has like 10th place upside, maybe 9th place upside. And are they going to try to do, and that's like another thing and that like an overarching thing that we haven't talked a ton about. It's kind of hard to know until right before the race. And usually by then most of the leagues are full, but like who's going to try to start on hard tires and hope that they can get a ton of laps and hope that maybe there's some weird safety car stuff like we've seen George Russell do, like we've seen Albon do. But yeah, I mean, to me, there is some pretty good upside value with him starting 17th, but at $6,000, you kind of need everything to go right to play him.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, the thing that we'll talk about this when we get into kind of our expected ownership and how we're going to maneuver through this. But I mean, Alonso's just going to be he's this combo we've talked about, the cheaper teammate that's less popular, and I just really love attacking that. It's just and the gap's probably going to be pretty wide because if you're not using Max and Charles together, you're going to have quite a few builds where you are using two mid-salary guys. So I think Ocon's going to naturally fall into a lot of those lineups. Like I said, we've just seen overwhelming number of ownership percentages on the team bet that's starting ahead, except for Aston Martin and Williams, because they're always so cheap. People are just kind of mixing them all together. But for these midfield teams, I think it's a really good leverage spot. I mentioned Aston Martin. It's going to be the same conversation every week with Aston Martin and Williams, unless we see one of them have a crazy good qualifying. Then we have a discussion. This is pretty much what we've seen with Aston Martin all year. Stroll at 3,600, Vettel at 3,400. Vettel starting 2 spots ahead at 16th versus Stroll's 18th finish in qualifying. So with Vettel being $200 cheaper, he'll be more popular than Stroll. I think I'm probably going to take the same approach I always do. If we think it's going to be, say, 35 to 25 Vettel, Stroll, I'll probably flip that in my lineups and go 35, 25 in favor of Vettel. Any thoughts on Aston Martin besides just what we've been doing every week?
I'm going to workshop this and try to come up with a term for it, but it's like you have to pay a failure tax, but it's not exactly the right word that I'm looking for.
No, I think I know what you're going for.
If you're building a lineup with one guy, you've got to build some lineups with the other guy. Like you have to play both of them. You can't be you can't just say I'm going to play Stroll and instead of Vettel. Like the money makes it to a point where, and they're starting so close in the grid where you have to play both of them. I think the numbers probably need to be close-ish, but like you said, with Vettel being cheaper and in a better starting position and frankly being a better driver, like you should play, like he's going to be featured in more lineups. So the contrarian angle is Stroll, but I think, you can't just kind of like write off one guy and say, oh, I'm going to go 70% one guy, 30, like you have to play them in almost an even number just because it's just such a toss up. And at the price, you kind of have to, have to take your medicine there.
And unlike Williams, even though we've kind of been using them the same, like Stroll and Vettel, there isn't a clear top driver right now. They've kind of been ping-ponging. The only time we're going to have a different conversation with Aston Martin or Williams, assuming kind of everything we've seen to this point stay the same, is like last race in Miami when not only were Max and Charles' salary so high that you couldn't roster them together with one of them as a captain, but we also saw Albon and Stroll have really good qualifying. Stroll ended up starting in the pit, so it didn't matter. But if we do get one of these cheap teams and they start like P10 and you can't jam in Max and Charles together, then there is like a conversation where maybe you can use Stroll starting P10 as captain just because the salaries were really weird last week. That isn't in play this week just because that's not they didn't qualify good enough, and the salaries still let you do jam higher price guys than last week. But I think that's the same convo every week. Alfa Romeo is probably the most interesting teammate battle because it's such a wide gap between these two guys right now in salary and in qualifying. This might be the biggest teammate salary gap we've seen all year. Bottas starting 7th all the way up at 7,600. Zhou's starting 15th all the way down at 3,200. I mean, Bottas is going to fit into a lot of lineups again because you're not going to be able to jam Max and Charles together, so Bottas is going to slide in really nicely. Zhou, I mean, if you play him, it's for salary relief, and you hope Bottas doesn't finish. I don't think this is a high incident track. I know Bryson said like it might be more exciting, but the chances of incidents is probably lower, which is like the most likely way Bottas doesn't finish ahead of Zhou, or he just fits into the Charles Max jam lineup. Like those are the only two ways, right?
Yeah. And then that's kind of where it is with Zhou. It's you feel like you're drawing dead unless Bottas's car blows up again, which I mean it did on Friday, but like he didn't have a problem there. I will say, like, Joe did get into the top 10 in Q1 today, so there is some pace in that car, but is he going to be able to consistently outrace Bottas? Like, probably not. And if he in at 15th, getting into the points is going to be tough. So you're looking at like a 1 point for being a classified driver ceiling, which, maybe that helps you out if you get all of the laps led in the fastest lap and you were able to get Max and Charles together. But yeah, I mean, otherwise he's just such a value play at that price. Bottas, I'm not really sure where he's going to fit into the equation this week in terms of lineups that have a really good chance to win. I may have to do a little bit more digging there. But that's kind of, I'm kind of with you there. It's a fascinating teammate battle. And like, eventually Joe's going to beat him head to head, but you just can't like bank on it in any particular week.
Yeah, I think the best time to use Joe is going to be on the tracks where you have a high incident rate because that's when things just go crazy. I think last week I didn't play 150. I think I played 100 lineups. I think I had Joe in 4. So like that kind of gives you an idea of if you're playing for chaos, like you're still not doing it at like a crazy high rate. You're not going to play half of your lineups like you would with Stroll and Vettel. So, I mean, if you're playing 20 lineups, like maybe use Joe in one lineup. I think that's the most you need to use him. A team that I cannot figure out for the life of me is AlphaTauri. Like going into the season, I mean, Gasly's been a really good driver. I'd say a very above average driver. Yuki was a rookie this last year. It seems like Yuki is figuring some stuff out. He qualified ahead of Gasly today at 13th. Gasly's 14th, but Yuki's 4,600, Gasly's 5,600. We could end up seeing a pretty big ownership gap with Tsunoda starting ahead and being $1,000 cheaper, even though Gasly has a name value. I mean, are we just flipping a coin on these guys right now, or are we just saying we just got to take the 4,600 on Tsunoda, and if something happens, we'll just eat it with Gasly?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where you are. Like Tsunoda, the $1,000 from like the building that I've done so far does make a difference.
Big difference.
It goes a long way. I have some lineups. I have a Verstappen, Russell, Tsunoda, Albon, Vettel, Ferrari, and some and Leclerc. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
so like
sure.
that difference does allow you to fit a Verstappen, Russell, and Tsunoda. And you're looking at two drivers who do have potential. They're starting close-ish to the top 10. So if there's something that happens there, but like it's a head-to-head one spot, right? Well, one spot difference in the grid. Flip a coin as to who's going to race better. Flip a coin as to whose car is going to blow up because they're in the Red Bull powered car. Like I love both drivers, and it is practically impossible to ever figure out, like you said, who's going to do what in any given week. I like them. I think they have upside potentially, and it's just hard to predict.
Yeah, this will probably be my where I lean the most heaviest on Run the Sims. Like, and sometimes we just have to do that. Especially, I mean, this sport is still really new. We're still only six races into a brand new DFS sport we've never seen before. So I think it's okay just to trust the computer. Probably smarter to trust the computer more often than not.
Yeah.
This is probably my biggest flip from pre-Bryson conversation to post-Bryson conversation. I was thinking that Haas had a great qualifying. I mean, we see it a lot with like we've seen Haas definitely isn't a bad team. They've had a pretty good year, all things considered. But these teams that are iffy when they qualify good, they're often good teams to fade. Bryce is telling us he thinks they could hold on to this. I mean, Magnussen's at 5,200, starting P8. Schumacher 4,200, starting P10. I think because Magnussen has been so much better with this $1,000 difference, I don't think it'll be. You mentioned with Gasly and Tsunoda that $1,000 difference goes a long way. I have a feeling the field is going to lean heavier on Magnussen, so it makes me think Schumacher might be a really interesting contrarian play. But the issue with Haas is the cool thing about Magnussen or Schumacher has been they've had that move up in the grid equity, and when you could get that at that sub 6K salary, that's really exciting. I mean, you're playing for beat the teammate, which is a coin flip right now, I think, and I guess you get a couple points for finishing the top 10. They are our best salary versus grid values. I thought they had more downside than upside, but Bryson got me double second guessing myself.
I don't know. I can't speak to any of the technical stuff about whether or not they have a chance to survive it this week, but I kind of look at it in a certain way where I kind of think tiers in my head of like, okay, Max and Charles, if I'm playing them, they're in a certain tier. And then the Landos and the Russells and the guys who are in that salary. So I look more comparatively salary wise, and like Schumacher starting 10th hypothetically has a ton more value to me than someone with like a Yuki Tsunoda, because he's 3 spots ahead of him. And I do think that if he can get, like, if you think about a ceiling in that perspective of 5 points for beating Magnussen, how many ever points for finishing like 8th, that's great. But you're also counting on a guy who just had his best ever qualifying result. Like, I think it was the first time they got both drivers into Q3 since 2019. And he has struggled throughout his career so far to put together good races from start to finish. So I'm going to play him in a couple of spots because I do think at 4,200, his upside there of compared to some of the other guys in the between, like, let's say 4,600 and below is a lot higher. But yeah, if there's a way I can work Magnussen in there just because he's been way more consistent this year, I will. It's about tinkering with and trying to figure out how the salaries exactly work. But I think they're both playable if you can make it work, because even though there's potential for them to fall, I think maybe we have overthought that a little bit at times.
Sure.
Now, they're not – I don't think they're both going to stay in that spot, but I think they both are worth trying to figure out. Like, basically, long story short, if the salary works and there's a driver starting in the top 10, try to find a way to make it work with them, because if it's under 6,000 and they start in the top 10, you've got a pretty good shot of maybe getting a little bit more value out of them than someone who's not.
Yeah, and like if like Stroll when he qualified P10 last week, I think that has a lot of downside because we've just seen Aston Martin be a car that just hasn't been great. Where Haas they've shown pace at times, so I think probably you just take the value on them. If ownership comes out and they are neck and neck, Schumacher and Magnussen, or Magnussen is more popular, then I think we're going to slam Schumacher. If it comes out vice versa, then I think it's probably more balanced because of the salary. But if we get it where it's close and you get that 4,200, that's a really good spot. I think this is going to be my favorite spot of the week to leverage. Lando 8,200 starting 11th I think people are just going to look at that, see Ricciardo starting ahead for 1,200 less, and be like, you have to, if you're playing a McLaren driver, you have to play Ricciardo. And I think that is where, even if you don't know a lot about F1, like the technical terms like Bryson does, this is just where understanding what's going on can give you a really huge advantage, because Lando, as we mentioned, he had a rough free practice 2. He gets his Q2 time disqualified, makes him start at 11th, but this car obviously has pace. He is in Q3 if he doesn't get that deleted, and he's been the better driver than Ricciardo. So not only do I think are you going to get like a really good shot at getting the +5 for beating Ricciardo, even though he's starting behind him, you don't want just that with 8,200. When McLaren's been good, they've been really good. We've seen Lando get a podium. So I think he's like what George Russell has been to us all year, starting back at that 8,000 range and moving up. He's the guy that I think, he has a shot to finish 4th or 5th and at like 10% ownership.
Yeah, I think his ceiling is, his best case scenario is probably 6th, but that still gets you three points for a +5 grid improvement. I'm with you. Like, ignore the fact that his lap got deleted. He was, first off, like Bryson said, if you watched, it was like about that, like how far off the track. He violated the track limits. If you didn't follow it, he went too far off the track and had his track time wiped out. It was faster than Ricciardo. He's got a faster car than Ricciardo. He's been faster than Ricciardo all year. Like, I definitely agree with you that I feel like, okay, we're talking like a 5th place finish plus the 5 points for beating a teammate plus 3 points for grid improvement. Like, there's a lot of upside there, whereas I don't necessarily see it with Ricciardo. I think Ricciardo is probably one of the like least valuable guys that you can play this week.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I'm going to be smashing Lando in a lot of lineups. He's going to be a really good contrarian play. Mercedes, they've been tough this year, especially Hamilton, because Hamilton's just been in this no man's land where he's priced above $9,000 still. So he at 9,200, you need a win, right? So and Russell has been, his salary's really been fluctuating. Like, if we take out the first week where we just didn't know what to expect, somewhere in the 7,500, now up to 8,800 range. The benefit for Russell is he hasn't had crazy good qualifying, so he has had a lot of moving up the grid upside. Now that they qualify good, you're losing a lot of that. So Russell's been the DFS MVP, shout out to the name of the podcast, no pun intended, of the year, but it's because he's been able to move up the grid so much. Like, so if you're playing Hamilton and Russell right now, it's like, do they have win equity? I don't know, man. It seems like a tough one for me. I'll probably have a couple Hamilton Russell lineups with a Mercedes constructor stacks, just because you have to build like random stuff, because crazy stuff happens in any sport and in DFS, but it's going to be a very small percentage. If I'm rolling out 100 lineups, it's probably only going to be 4 or 5. But I mean, these guys are kind of in a no man's land, don't you think?
Perhaps, but perhaps not. First and foremost, DraftKings, if you're watching this, and I know you are, you have to start, if you really want to make this accurate, you have to start swapping the salary on Russell and Hamilton. He's been the better driver all year.
I agree.
My thing is, at 8,800 compared to Carlos Sainz, like, the only drivers who on the grid who I think have better value in that top tier in terms of like their expectation level are Max and Charles. I don't think Carlos Sainz, I don't think Sergio Perez have more value than George Russell. So if you're looking for like who the best potential number 2 driver in your lineup can be, I still think George Russell provides that, because he's going to allow you more salary flexibility down the board than those other guys will. You're totally right. Like, he can't get a plus. He can't go up 5 spots. He's in 4th place. Like Lewis Hamilton, though, Lewis Hamilton's 6th. To get that extra benefit for him moving up, he'd have to finish 1st. He's not going to finish 1st. So I'm pretty confident that George Russell's going to get the points for finishing 4th or 3rd again. Pretty confident he's going to beat Hamilton again. Like, I still think he's got more value than a Sainz or a Perez in particular, and that's why I think he's ultimately still very playable at the salary that he's at compared to some of the other guys that you're probably going to be balancing your lineups with.
Yeah, I think, again, because you can't stack Max and Charles a lot unless you're using them as drivers, I think Russell probably fits in a lot. Hamilton, I think we can make it as simplistic as, if you're going to play a 9K driver for whatever reason, if that's just how your salaries work out and you want to, like, just play Sergio, because at least he's in a Red Bull, right? If you're just going to play a $9,000, I don't think either of them are playable. Yeah, I don't like them, but I'm just saying, if you're going to, there's only 2 guys in the 9K range, right? So if for some reason you're going to play one, why wouldn't you play the guy in the Red Bull car?
I would actually disagree. I think I would play the way that car has shown pace, and the fact that Checo has not really had a good week and doesn't really seem to be comfortable in that car this week. I actually probably lean Hamilton. I would play Hamilton over Checo if I had to play one of them, but I'm not playing either guy.
You're right.
Like, I'm not playing enough lineups.
Yeah, I'm not
playing enough lineups to vary it up enough where I'm going to have to like force myself into a situation of playing one of those guys. And if like Checo Perez ends up in 2nd place, whatever, like cool. Like, Checo was 5th, right, in qualifying. Between the 2 of them, like
George Russell finished ahead of him.
Yeah, like I don't know, man. I'm both guys are, like I said, Ricardo was one of the most unplayable guys. Like, he's probably 3rd behind Checo.
I agree. Yeah. That's fair. One thing that I guess kind of DraftKings got right is they bumped up Albon's salary. He's been clearly ahead of Latifi. We've seen them like hovering around. Latifi's stone minimum every week. That's just, it is what it is. We've seen Albon hovering around at 3,200, 3,400. They bump him up to $4,000 this week. So he is priced way more Latifi, but he's still just the obvious play on the cheap salary besides the Aston Martin. As long as you aren't playing Charles and Max together, you should be able to fit Albon quite comfortably. He's going to be crazy popular, but he just makes a lot of sense. He probably still has some move up the grid upside. Albon does, because we've seen them gamble with Albon. We've seen Albon show good pace, so we obviously know that that's there. We're gonna play Latifi some, because as long as he's the min salary, it just if you're playing a lot of lineups, you're just gonna need that $3,000. He has no downside. He's not gonna get you negative points, and we've seen lineups do well with Latifi with a 0. So you're playing him for the upside of you're not playing him to beat Albon. You're playing him to fit in more expensive guys. So like, I mean, the only reason we're playing Latifi is for salary relief, right?
Nicholas Latifi, if you're watching this show, and I know you are, if you're ever going to beat Albon, like, dude, you're 20th, he's 19th, he's 1 spot ahead of you. If you're ever going to get a head-to-head win this year, like, this has got to be it, right? Like, you play Latifi because he fits in lineups, and eventually one time he's going to get you 6 points. Well, he might not get you 6 points. He might get you 5. There one time he'll at least get you 5.
Yeah, he's good.
He may not classify, but
he's going to finish at a classify.
One or two races where Nicholas Latifi is going to get you 5 points, and it's going to help you win in a lineup, and you've got to play him, and it sucks. And he got beaten in free practice 1 by a rookie who had never driven in a Formula 1 car before. But, you've got to play him. I like Albon as a play almost every week just because he's going to be pretty consistent and he's cheap. So, yeah, I mean, it's the same conversation we have every week with Williams, and I'm just tired of having to talk about Nicholas Latifi.
Yeah, I mean, the only difference is the bit for the first, I think maybe 3 races, it was just kind of throw out equal shares of both Williams and Aston Martin drivers. Now it's just we're gonna have even if Albon's popular, that's the player we're eating the chalk on every week, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, we don't have the official Run the Sims ownership projections yet, but make sure you go to Run the Sims when they do come out. They're usually updated pretty close to when the show's over. But I mean, we have a pretty good idea of how things are going to play out with Charles and Max locking out the front, and with you being able to afford them quite comfortably, except for when one of them's the captain, they're in the same lineup. They are going to dominate the captain. Red Bull and Ferrari are going to dominate constructor. The biggest takeaway that I had from last week, which I butchered because I just didn't expect it to be this big of a gap, was that when Leclerc was on pole last week, he ended up in 3.5 times as many lineups as the captain than Max. I did not think the gap was going to be that wide. Max was only in 14%. Charles was in 44% as the captain. I don't know if that merges this week, even though Charles gets the pole. I think a lot of there's been enough talk over the last 2 weeks that Red Bull's just the better car. If Run the Sins comes out and we have it as Leclerc in 40% and Max in 20%, I'm gonna be way overweight on Max. I still think I probably just favor Max because Red Bull's just been crushing if they stay on the track, they're winning. So, I mean, basically the driver captain question every week is Max or Charles. Have you changed your view on these two guys since Miami?
No, and I'm really hoping it's the same thing that happened 2 weeks ago, and we'll get to it with the betting odds, how that changed. But I'm assuming the DFS is going to be a little slow to it, and I think you're going to see a lot of people backing Charles Leclerc just because he got the pole this week.
Yeah, I agree.
But man, it's those two guys. Again, if you're looking for something kind of crazy, maybe it's George Russell to me is always going to be the chaos guy that you're going to want. And if you're doing a ton of lineups, maybe you sprinkle him in. I know.
I would say even if you're only playing a 3 Max, I think there's a really strong case for using one of those lineups as a George captain Mercedes constructor, just because.
Yeah, I have one of those lineups.
This week. Yeah, I think because you're just gonna if 60% to 65% of the field is using the Charles, Max, Red Bull, Ferrari captain combos, you just get so much leverage just by using George and Mercedes, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah. We already talked about Haas a lot. Bryson basically flipped to my complete. I'm right with hashtag right with Bryson. But the crazy thing that we saw last week, and this is going to translate a little bit more. I thought for sure with it not being possible to jam Max and Charles last week, that we would see some really high ownership on these 7,500 to 9K range guys, just because it was hard to if you're going to use your salary, that's how you're going to do it. We didn't see it with that, even with all those balance builds I thought we were going to see last week. Gasly was the only driver in the 8 to 9K range that was over 30%. The other guys in the mid salary range were still sub 25%. So now with ownership, not ownership, with salary getting dialed back down a little bit for the ceiling, I think even less people are going to be rostering the McLaren salary guys, less on Russell. So I think there is a ton of advantage this week to my guys are going to be Russell and Lando, but building with those is just going to kind of flip the salary on its head, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you couldn't build it, so you had to be a little bit more creative. But I think most people who play DFS are going to be leaning a little bit on the lazier side, other than people who do this. Especially
since especially since tomorrow is well, I guess it's not that bad for East Coast. It's starting at 9 a.m., but it's an earlier race than we've typically had this year. So that could play into people not being as creative, right?
For sure. And I think that's part of it. But I also just think like, oh, I can play Max and Charles, and maybe there'll be enough aversion because of, the thing that I might find interesting is being able to get Sebastian Vettel in a lineup with those two guys. I think people will be like, oh, well, he's a good driver historically, and look where he's starting in his salary. Like that's going to get people to try to make those lineups work. Definitely. And that's going to give you some value elsewhere. And there's a very real possibility that this just ends Max, Charles 1 and 2 in some order. They lead all of the laps. It's it's chopped 500 ways, like we talked about earlier, and we move on with our lives. We're on to Monaco.
And I would say we carry over some Miami strategy in that I think there is a lot of value in some because there are only a couple of combos of Max Charles with one of them as captain. I think there is a lot of value in using driver Max Charles and just an alternate cap. Those George lineups, well, George probably won't work, but like maybe a Bottas captain lineup, you're able to jam Charles and Max's drivers, and you could still get a ton of upside if you use Red Bull Ferrari as your if you don't stack your captain and constructor. And to that point, last week, because salaries were so strict, it just made a ton of sense to not stack captain and constructor as much as we have been. Now, the best lineup still ends up being Max and Red Bull, but we did see a lot of 1% lineups not stack constructor. I think it was a really sharp move to not stack captain constructor as much. So I was down to about 30% of my lineups using captain constructor. I think I'll be back to about 50-50 this week.
Yeah, I think that's something that, and it's going to kind of, when we talk about other unique strategies, that's something that I was thinking about today, looking at some of these numbers. Like, has a lineup one that didn't stack captain and constructor? Has there been a nuts lineup this year? Was there? There was a
Mercedes constructor.
Yeah. It was the one where, but it was the one where Ferrari almost ended up number one constructor because
Charles led every lap.
Dominated. That was the week that he won the Grand Slam. I think there's a possibility where we could see that again this week, where you could play I think it's a Verstappen Ferrari setup, where because I'm not as high on Checo Perez this week. He just, like I said earlier, hasn't just been great on track. And there's a scenario where if it's Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz in that order, where it ends up where Ferrari still ends up with slightly more points than Red Bull does. And now if
you're saying even if Max wins, Ferrari could still get more points.
Yes.
Yes. I agree.
In second and third, it's a possibility. I don't know how likely it is. I'm going to play one just because it's like a fun little twist on a lineup.
Definitely.
But it would basically come down to laps led, fastest lap, that kind of thing. Where if, like, say he and Charles split laps led, which is possible with Charles leading it, and Charles gets the fastest lap, Ferrari's going to end up with more points under a lot of situations there. And if Checo has a bad day, then it's easy peasy and it's done. And that's what happened in there. But like, that was kind of the first time where I couldn't really see the Mercedes things in Australia. Is that where it was? Where I think it was I've completely lost track. Yes.
Yeah, it was Australia.
It was
Saudi?
Australia.
Yeah,
it was Australia. It was Australia, then MLO, which was Max, and then Max.
Yep.
In Australia, like, couldn't see that coming. This one is just like, maybe because I think as a team, I think Ferrari's a little bit stronger, even if I think Max probably is a driver that is going to win the race.
Yeah, and to your point about it's exactly what I was going to say. The reason that a driver can carry their constructor to be the best team, even if their teammate doesn't do well, they basically have to monopolize laps led. They have to get all of them pretty much. And this kind of sets up with Charles starting first, where that probably doesn't happen. I agree with you, where I think Max probably still wins, but as Bryson was saying, there aren't a lot of long straights on this track, and actually sets up for Ferrari's setup. So I don't think that necessarily means that Max automatically wins, but I think it gives a lot more credence to like a Max in first with Charles and Sainz both being on the podium as well. Like a 2-3 finish for Ferrari makes a lot of sense this week.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And the more I think about it, the more I think we might see a rainbow podium this week as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the secondary drivers for Ferrari and Red Bull are vulnerable this week to the Mercedes cars.
Yeah,
and I think we could see a scenario where one of the two Mercedes ends up on the podium, which would make for a bit of a fun little twist on. how things have gone so far this year.
Yeah, I think if I looked at it correctly, I just glanced at it. I think you had did you have a double driver stack you liked earlier in the week when you were messing with lineups?
Yeah, I don't remember what it ended up being, and I don't think I liked it as much anymore. But I think it was something along the lines of Mercedes. It was George, Mercedes, and then the 2 Ferrari drivers. So probably George. I don't remember, but that was what it was at one point, and I don't know. I can go back and revisit it, and I have no idea.
I would just say my only point would be that when we aren't able to jam Max and Charles as much or not at all, which I'm still kind of playing this like you can't do it just because, as we mentioned, like those 3 or 4 combos are going to be duped like crazy. I do think there is some credence to the double driver stack, which we just haven't seen it hit yet. Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of the same idea as the not stacked in the captain instructor. Just because it hasn't hit yet, it's still going to give you a level unique to set. If it does hit, you have a chance to like win without a chop or win with a very minimal chop. So you need a perfect run out, but I wouldn't discount the double driver stack. Anything else you're thinking about just in terms of how you're approaching this race?
Not really.
This DFS slate, I mean.
Not really. We talked about the ultimate stud and dud lineup with Max and Charles in it a lot, but like it's going to be duped a million times, so it's like it's kind of a bit of a whatever to me. But nothing else really that it stands out to me. Is there anything else that stands out to you in this, and when it comes to what your setups are going to be this week?
No, I think the like I said, the big things are going to be mixing in some Lando and George, maybe even the captain positions, having Mercedes as some constructor. Like I'm still gonna, you're still gonna use Max and Charles a ton, but there's definitely some creativity that we've talked about that I definitely think we're gonna want to lean into, and I would definitely just go back and listen to that Bryson insight, because I think there's just a lot of really good stuff in how we think the race is going to play out that we could translate directly to DFS. Let's move on to this was betting. We've added some pick'em to our chats because one, Underdog added F1 a couple weeks ago, and we had a pretty good week there last week. Price Picks has also added some Formula One to their platform. I haven't played Prize Picks yet, but I have been going hard on Underdog. A couple of things we added to 4for4 this week were specific Discord channels for Underdog and Prize Picks Pick'em. So when we started recording this, Underdog hadn't loaded. I don't think they've loaded all of their props yet because they only had 3 rivals in there. They'll probably have a lot more matchups to bet on, but from what they have listed now, and I will post this on Discord for sure, just to remind you guys, right now they have Lando finishing under 9.5 position. I mentioned I liked him starting in 11th. That car showed a lot of pace, so I think he could finish ahead of 9th. I had Schumacher over 11.5. I might scrap that one again just because Bryson, I think convinced me, but Latifi over 18.5. I mean, free money. This isn't a high incident track. Latifi's finishing he's finishing over 18.5. Sainz under 0.5 laps led. Like that's crazy that exists. Like he's not going to lead a lap. No,
so it was the Lewis Hamilton one from the last time.
Exactly. And then if more rivals come out, I will post those in the Discord. But Lando under 9.5, Latifi over 18.5, Sainz under 0.5 laps led. Smash those on Underdog. How's gambling markets looking?
They're slow to come out. I'm looking right now at some of the Prize Pick stuff, and there's nothing that really stands out. I think maybe Ricardo under 1.5 points scored. I'd have to do a little bit more digging into it. And they also have pit stop time, which good luck. I have no clue what to do there.
Yeah, I mean the only thing I saw there is they have long odds on Ferrari pit stop time, and I don't even have any pit stop data, but it just seems like if you're getting long odds on Ferrari or Red Bull at all, like just bet it, right? Like why not?
Yeah, for sure. So from a betting perspective, some stuff's coming out. Bovada just listed a ton of race prop kind of things, and then they just canceled them. So I wonder what. I literally just refreshed it and went away. Markets are still opening up. The one thing that I have for sure bet this week, and I think I think that Max Verstappen's going to end up winning this race. However, I think it's a coin flip, and I got Charles Leclerc to win the race at plus 145 at FanDuel. It's even longer at other books to shop around and find the best price for it. Again, I don't think he's going to win, but it's a coin flip. I think it should probably be like 115, 120, and not 140, so I bet it. I think what happened was there were some very smart people in the betting space in Miami who jammed Verstappen when he was he was plus 195 to win that race. Yeah. And I think the books are a little worried that the same thing's going to happen again, where even though Leclerc won the pole, he's not going to win the race. So I think they're trying to limit some of the damage there, but I think they might have gone a little bit overboard on the price. So I still think Verstappen's going to win. I think if you can get Verstappen at plus money, and I think I saw him at like plus 100 in a couple of places, I probably would bet that over betting the Leclerc. But at the same time, like Leclerc at plus 140, 145, 150, like whatever you can get it at, bet that. Like I think it's just the value on it is too good to pass up. Again, remember, a lot of the times you're not betting whether or not you necessarily think something's going to happen. You're just trying to assess value, and I think there's value there. And then these are couple of other bets that I put. I don't even know if you looked at the bets that I put in our outline, but these are things that I bet already this week. The French Open starts this week, and if you're unfamiliar, on the women's side, Iga Swiatek is the destroyer of worlds right now in women's tennis. She's won 27 matches in a row. I think she hasn't dropped a set since like March. She's been absolutely insane. So one of my buddies, shout out to Noops, who is one of our hosts of Brown Bag Bets on BetSperts, who's a big-time women's tennis handicapper. I said, how do I bet her in the French Open? He said, parlay her with all of your bets this week. And so that got me thinking to just do something stupid. So that's what I did this week. And I have, and this ties to Formula One because I have two different parlays. It's they both involve Iga Swiatek to win the French Open. They both involve Max Verstappen to win the Drivers' Championship, not this week. I think that if you want to bet him to win this week and parlay that with Iga, go ahead. But I just think there's less variance over the course of the season, and I think over the course of the season, he will be a much better driver than Leclerc and win the title again. And then I have Alabama to win the national championship in college football, and then Ohio State to win the national championship in college football in my other two parlays. The Alabama one, plus 900. The Ohio State one, plus 1733. I think Alabama's going to win the national championship. I think Ohio State's the only other team that could really challenge them for that this year. So I figured, what the hell? Why not throw some money there and see what happens? And it's all dead in 2 weeks if Iga doesn't win. And if she does, we have fun sweats developed for the rest of the year. And I think Max is going to win the Drivers' Championship, so I feel pretty confident there.
I think we could safely say we are the only pod in the history of the world to start with an aerospace engineer and end with the Iga Swiatek take. So I think that is a great place to wrap it up. Went a little long this week, but it was well worth it with what we got from Bryson. That was awesome, and I think it's going to translate into a very, very profitable week for us. We will be back next week with the Monaco preview. We got back-to-back racing weeks, so we get to fire it up almost as soon as it's over. This is really exciting. So back-to-back weeks. Let's go. We'll be back in exactly 7 days. As always, we are presented by Run the Sims. Go to runthesims.com and use the promo code 4for4 to get 10% off of USFL and F1 projections tools and content for both DFS and betting, or you can click on the link in the description. And if you're down there, make sure you click on the link on the Underdog promo. I talked about all of the really good pick'em action that Underdog has on Formula One. They have it for every other sport that you could think of, as well as the best ball tournament in the world. $10 million prize pool. I've been going hard on Best Ball Mania 3 with both content and drafting. If you deposit at least $10 on Underdog Fantasy, use the promo code 4for4, you'll get a free 4for4 Pro subscription, and you'll also get a deposit bonus match up to $100. You must be a new Underdog user, as I mentioned. See the link for that in the description, and get in our Discord to talk about our Underdog picks up to the very last minute. Make sure you're checking out BetSperts Golf. You can get access to the BetSperts bundle available on Dynasty League Football. That's access to 4for4, Dynasty League Football, Fantasy Life app, and BetSperts for just $99. That's $209 value. Please, if you are watching, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening, please give us a 5-star rating and review, whatever platform you are listening on. And make sure you are following all of us. 4for4 is at 4for4 Football. All the important BetSperts Golf stuff is at BetSperts Golf. Dan is at really Dan Weiner. Run the Sims at Run the Sims. Don't forget about Bryson at Natural Paradigm. I'm TJ at TJ Hernandez. We'll talk to you guys next week.